Today I have my co-host, that is Shaun Taylor, Jamila K. Wilson, and Dr. Marwin Spiller. Dr. Marwin Spiller is going to lead this discussion, so I'm going to yield to Dr. Spiller.
Thank you for that introduction. I'm going to give you a brief sort of survey of Michelle Alexander's points in the book, The New Jim Crow, which has spent nearly 80 weeks on the New York Times bestseller list and has brought to the forefront a national conversation about why the United States has become the world's largest incarcerator, with over 2.2 million in prison or jail and 7.7 million under the control of the criminal justice system, with African American boys and men, and now women, making up a disproportionate number of those in prison. Alexander draws on pages of statistics and legal citations to argue that the get tough approach to crime that began in the Nixon administration and intensified with Ronald Reagan's declaration of the war on drugs has devastated Black America. Today, Professor Alexander writes, nearly 1/3 of Black men are likely to spend time in prison at some point, only to find themselves falling into permanent second-class citizenship after they get out. In this segment of Speak Up, we will discuss the merits of Professor Alexander's argument and where do we go from here. So we can start this conversation at a lot of different points, but I want to start with you, Chama. What do you think we should go from here with regard to Michelle Alexander's point in terms of the mass incarceration of African American men and its impact on the Black community?
I think right now the way society is set up is pretty much out to get the African American male. And I think that is accomplished by depriving our communities and not offering enough economic independency. So I think that when you are deprived, when you're hungry, when you're trying to eat, you tend to do things that will get you in trouble. And I think our communities are pretty much starved to the point to where we turn to criminalistic activities, especially if you're not strong enough. You know, you turn to criminalistic activities to feed your families.
Okay.
And so that's giving another reason for our people to be arrested, especially our Black men.
Jamila, I saw you nodding your head in agreement with that.
Oh, yes, sir. I believe that poverty equals violence. Poverty equals criminality. So, you know, if we want to address the issues of quote-unquote criminals on our street, then we need to first, as Shama indicated, address the issues of people being able to eat. Am I able to pay my Ameren bill or Silco, as they say here in Peoria? Am I able to make, to put food on the table? Am I able to get from point A to point B and my children get to those necessary spaces and receive quality education? If those entities or those inputs are at any point questioned, you create stress. You create anxiety. You create someone that's functioning outside of their normal rationale.
Create the Hunger Games.
Okay.
Much. I don't know if you've seen the Hunger Games or not, but it's the story of the Black wife.
Shaun, I mean, how do we balance those real issues that your co-host raised with the need for law and order? I mean, we talk about mass incarceration. Certainly no one's want that. And certainly the issues are real. People got to eat. But also, how do we balance law and order?
Well, I mean, obviously our society is built on laws, but we're also a society or a country that's built on the dehumanization of Black people. And obviously we've come a long way since then. We have a long way to go. But as my co-host raised the point so eloquently, people got to eat, and it's about economic opportunity. As Ms. Alexander talks about in her book, numerous studies have shown that when people have great economic opportunities, that they're less likely to commit crimes.
Right.
And with the economy, we talk about the economic opportunities. I mean, I think at the core of that is education. And most of these communities that have been racked by mass incarceration have terrible almost non-existent school systems.
Mm-hmm.
And you look even here in Peoria, and District 150 consistently does not perform at a high level.
Mm-hmm.
And then you look at the economy
Right.
that is associated with District 150, in particular the South Side,
Mm-hmm.
and it's not very good, to put it mildly. So.
Right.
Excuse
I'm
me.
sorry. I was just going to say 70% of the students in District 150 are from the South End.
Right.
So to your point,
Right.
that the education is, subpar,
Right.
speaks to, how many children are in that school district.
Right.
And then also too, I believe in 61605 zip code, the average household in that zip code makes about $14,300 a year.
Right.
So you can't really live off of that.
Right.
You can survive. They surviving,
Right.
but they
right.
ain't living.
Right.
And a fact here that I have is says a typical black household has accumulated less than 1/10 of wealth of a typical white one, and it's only getting worse.
Right.
So you can see the huge disparity between the races, and it's directly connected to what Michelle Alexander is talking about in her book, and why we have mass incarceration.
Right. And I'm sorry, can I just jump in really quick? I was actually talking to a parent of a District 150 student, and she informed me, and I don't know how accurate this is, but she informed me that the whole district is eligible for free and reduced lunch because the per capita in the entire school district is so low.
Right.
And I was just like, that's pretty alarming. Also, I read a statistic on the internet that said, and I hate to give statistics without giving sites, but I can't remember what site it was, that said you can anticipate the number of prison beds that
yes.
you'll need
Right.
by the amount of illiterate fourth graders that you have.
Mm-hmm.
So, this goes back to education leading to economic opportunity.
Right.
If you can't read and write and articulate yourself and prove yourself valuable in this capitalistic system, then somebody's going to capitalize off of you.
All right.
Yeah, certainly the situation is dire, and you all referenced the local context. And certainly we can't talk about that without putting in an even broader context the fact that Peoria is a blue-collar city. It's a city that was built on manufacturing jobs, and given that a lot of the major employers in the area have sort of exported a lot of jobs out of the country and other parts of the country, and we know that those jobs in all likelihood are not coming back. And so what is the future of this area? Are we likely to see even more incarceration?
Well, I would be willing to answer to the affirmative, because according to our governor's plan for bringing in more jobs to Illinois, as does Sherry Bustos, Representative Bustos, spoke boastfully about in her campaign that we bring more prisons to Illinois and we'll bring more prison guard jobs to Illinois. Who will be in those cells? That's a question that we have to ask.
Well, we know the answer. We know the answer because we're looking at the disparity in our zip codes. You know what I mean? And if it is, as we say, the disparity being directly connected to crime and mass incarceration, then we already know it's going to be the black male.
Well, that's interesting then. Then maybe we need to come up with a different plan for economic development in Illinois.
Yeah, good point. And I think that certainly the state have some problems, and that's certainly another conversation. A whole segment can be dedicated to the problems, our economic problems here in Illinois. And again, I want to go back to the point of the real issues that are confronting our community in terms of dealing with the real problem of drugs in our community, and the real problem of incarcerating our young men and women. We know, for example, that the disparities in crack cocaine that we are all aware of, a lot of that push for those disparities took place among many of our black legislators who were responding to their constituents that they wanted something to be done about the drugs in their community. One of those responses was that we're going to create these disparities in how we punish certain drug offenses.
Mm-hmm.
And so certainly they did not anticipate what we would see now. But how do we roll back? Or can we roll that back? Because certainly we know that a lot of communities are still struggling with those same issues. I mean, what's the conundrum? At least the solution to the conundrum of, I mean, that's a real issue on both sides.
Right. Well, I think, Michelle Alexander spoke to the fact that drugs are not just concentrated in black communities, but you will find even higher concentrations of drugs in white communities. It's about where they seek to place the spotlight to address the issue. And we're coming, when we see this legislation, when we see these policymakers making these decisions about the disparity, we're also seeing a time of deindustrialization in those urban spaces where drugs, somehow or another, again, there's this magical process where drugs ended up in these urban spaces where there were no other opportunities of economic development. And so it has been, but what we must begin to do now to address these issues is really kind of take a few steps back, see the forest as opposed to the trees, and know that there are assets that has come out of that experience. So we talk about crack, cocaine, crack. From my understanding, it's mixed with baking soda. Somebody is a chemist. Somebody is literally mixing up, different batches of whatever, figuring out what its effect is on this part of the body, so forth and so on. There are market analysts out there on the street. There are accountants, there are businessmen and women. You know what I'm saying? These are some crafty and intelligent people. So if we take a few steps back and look at the whole picture and realize we have lots of assets.
And think about, what opportunities we can come up with so that they're now using those gifts and talents for something that is positive and that gives back to the community.
That's legal.
And creates wealth.
And it's interesting because now marijuana, for medicinal purposes, is legal in the state of Illinois. So, we already know that game pretty well. We should try and figure out how to get a little piece of that legal dollar.
Right. And certainly, we can't ignore the fact that under the Obama administration, the Holder has sort of made those disparities a lot better.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And so, but is policy the answer?
I think policy definitely is a piece of the puzzle.
Okay.
I mean, we have to think about this, right? Like, I'm all about getting to the core of stuff.
Right.
So, when the Civil Rights Law was enacted back in '64, you have the end of Jim Crow.
Mm-hmm.
We have 300 to 400 people that are incarcerated.
Mm-hmm.
2015, we have over 2 million people that are incarcerated.
Right.
So to me, this isn't an accident that in 40, 50 years, our prison population quadrupled as the rates of violent crime went down. So
Right.
there's definitely a disconnect there.
Right.
And in Michelle Alexander's book, she talks about the fact that a lot of criminologists in the 70s even thought that having 300,000 to 400,000 people, I think it's 350,000 people incarcerated was way too much.
Mm-hmm.
And that because studies had shown that there was no real correlation between putting people in prison
Right.
and them not committing crimes,
Right.
that the prison system would actually go away because just organically would kind of fade away. So I
Right.
don't think they ever could have envisioned that it would quadruple to have 2 million people behind bars.
Right.
And so I definitely think that there's some policy as far as the war on drugs,
Right.
and that war on drugs being totally focused in the black community that has accounted for the alarming rate of black males
Right.
being arrested.
Right.
I think also, too, Michelle spoke about the fact that when they are released from the prison system,
Right.
it's so hard for them to infiltrate back into society that they end up going right back through the same cycle again. And this is why you hear about people going to jail or prison 3, 4, 5, 6, 11 times.
Right.
Because our society makes it that much harder for a felon to, come back out and live a profitable life in society.
Right. Well, she said they're legally discriminated against.
Right.
Because if you're a felon, you have to check a box, and then you can't get housing, you can't get a job, you can't get employment, you can't vote.
Welfare.
Right. Welfare. Exactly.
Well, technically in Illinois, if you have a felony, you can vote. So we definitely want to make that clear that if you do have a felony, you can vote. So the, upcoming April 7th election for city council, you can participate in.
And if I'm someone who've read the book and I read the book and I just disagree wholeheartedly with Michelle's whole argument, I raised the point, right? Yes, people get out of jail, they can't vote, they're not eligible for food stamps, they're not eligible for public housing. That's just not black people. Everybody, all felons, white, black, Latino, everyone subject to the same rule. Why is this a black problem?
Because it's a black problem because we are mass incarcerated. White people aren't mass incarcerated like our black men are. So that's why it then becomes a black problem.
Well, I don't have unfortunately, I don't have the statistics in front of me, but there have been lots of studies done very recently and in the last 10 years about a black and white, ex-offender going for positions of employment, and the white offender being given the second chance where the black offender had not. And this is disproportionately shown in all of those circumstances. There has not been a study yet showing the opposite. So it's pretty unanimous that white offenders are given the opportunities for second chances where black offenders are not.
Right. And just on a human level, black people are a minority in this country, but we're a majority of the prison population. So if I'm just trying to, balance those things in my mind, then the logic would lead me to think that black people are more violent, that we use more drugs, that we do more bad things, we break more rules. And I know that that's just not true. But if you shine a spotlight on something or an area, like Chama said before, you're going to find these things. Just like if they were to shine the spotlight and do stop and frisk on, say, I don't know, Wall Street, they might find a lot of people with some cocaine on. That might just happen. Right? Or they might find someone who has a suspended license. Or a gun. Or a little bit of a dime bag or something. So if you go look for those things, but once again, we talk about black people, in particular the black male being well, I can't even say in particular the black male, black people being dehumanized. And so if you're walking down the street in your neighborhood and someone says to you, hey, I need to stop and search you, then you don't know the police officer because he's not from your community, and it's dark, and he has his hand on his gun, you're going to stop, and he's going to search you, and he might find something. But that's never going to happen on Wall Street when the guy's in an Armani suit, and they know this person, they may know the chief of police. It's just, that's not their reality. So they're not dehumanized in that way.
Okay.
You are listening to Speak Up. I am here with Shaun Taylor, Jamila K. Wilson, and Dr. Marwin Spiller. And he is leading the conversation on The New Jim Crow, which is a book written by Michelle Alexander. And before we went to break, I believe that Shaun was talking about how we willingly give up our rights when we're approached by a police officer and we're asked to be stopped and frisked. And I wanted to say something about that because Michelle Alexander also mentioned how she used to go around and teach know your rights. But then she had to stop doing that because by educating the black community on their rights, the police brutality rate went through the roof. And so a part of that is because, like you said, if you're in a dark alley and you're alone, at the end of the day, it's going to be your word against theirs. And who are they going to believe?
And maybe not even if you're in a dark alley, if you're just walking home from the corner store. Some people would say, well, why are you in a dark alley? You're by yourself. It's like, one, why does that matter? I can walk anywhere I want. I'm an American just like you are. I'm a human like you are. But if you're walking home from the corner store, from getting a beer maybe, you're 21 years old, you're legal. And it's dark and they say, hey, got something in that bag there, we need to stop and search you. That's dehumanizing. Knowing that you're being frisked by another man or woman for absolutely no reason, and someone's putting their hands on you, that makes you feel a certain way. I don't think anybody enjoys that.
But to play devil's advocate for a moment, many would argue that they're not racist, that I'm just doing my job. And we heard that a lot about the whole Ferguson uprising, the New York situation is they're just doing their job.
Can I speak to that? I think, and this is beautiful. One of the beautiful aspects of Michelle's book is that it covers so many intricate pieces where she talks a lot about implicit bias and where we're able to use our this ideal of, oh, I'm not racist, but there's a bias against certain types of people that you see that's not explicit. You don't, actively communicate that, oh, whatever. But it's how you think. It's how you approach the situation that you're going into, which is already, framed as a dangerous job. So, as a police officer, they ultimately kind of frame the narrative of police law enforcement as this is a dangerous job. Right. So you have that, and the implicit bias that's reinforced by media, by this ideal of the black criminal, are what some scholars, Dr. Campbell, who is writing his dissertation on the imagination of a black criminal. And so, we have allowed media and culture and literature to help frame how we see and understand criminality to be. And it has always been the black face. In fact, one of the pieces that got Bill Clinton elected in 92 was that he went back to Arkansas to administer the killing of this Willie Horton, I believe his name was. And so, this get tough, we will get rid of, we will exterminate the problem.
Right. And it kind of speaks to your point, though, about policy. Because if their job is to protect and serve, then what protect and serve looks like obviously is different to some people.
Right.
And I don't think protect and serve should include stop and frisk, dehumanization, targeting, doing... batting down people's doors for drug raids and flash bombing babies who have to have surgery. I know that was in the news a few weeks ago. Like, it shouldn't over a few grams of drugs.
But I think if we have people who are not even aware of their biases, then how do we break through? And certainly we talk about that. But what about these are perhaps some of the same cut from the same cloth to people who are given jobs? I mean, if the black person before you have implicit bias. Right. They're criminals from the start. Right. They're violent from the start. And so, therefore, again, it gets to that Jim Crow status. I mean, how do you break out of that? So it seems like from top to bottom.
But once again, it comes back to education, right? Right. So we're educating a bunch of young people, not only on their history, but on their civil rights, but to be successful. Right. Then there's gonna be more people that look like us and look like them in those hiring positions. Right. But if we continue to allow education to fail, then we allow someone else to control the narrative.
I agree with what you're saying, Shaun, too. But there are also a lot of educated people who sell drugs, and that goes back to the lack of opportunity to be able to get employed. So I feel like education plays a huge part in it. Right. And then, but it's like once you get educated, I've seen people, get their college degree and go 9-10 years and can't get a job, or at least a job working in what it is that they went to school for. Right. So it's like you're almost like got your hands tied behind your back. You follow the way that you were taught to do, go to school. And then you graduate from school and you still can't get a break. I was watching, I believe it was Hidden Colors. And in Hidden Colors, a guy on there was saying that when he was younger, his parents taught him, you go to school, you get an education, and then you go to work, you find a good job. But he was like, now he teaches his children, you go to school, you get an education, you come out, you become an entrepreneur. and you start to create jobs for your brothers and sisters because nobody else is doing it for you.
Right. But like you said, you get the education.
Right.
And they become an entrepreneur, which I'm all for that. But most of these felons don't get a chance to get their education. They've already suffered from being given a terrible education, and then they enter the penal system before they are college graduate age.
Right. Well, I do want to go back to Marwin, what you were posing about policies or things that we can do differently as it relates to implicit bias. So, this is I believe a tangible piece that we can incorporate because there's all this talk about retraining or training police officers. I think in the hiring process, psychological tests can be done to find implicit bias. There are those tests out there,
But
and it is important that we as citizens require that test being administered for any of their current, law enforcement and any future hires to find out where there is this bias. And again, these are very easily administered, tests that have been created, and we should, be looking into those types of resources so that we'll have a better ideal of who these officers are that are on the street and how they are interacting with people of color.
But also, too, I think, when we were having a conversation with a police chief, he mentioned that they do have those tests in place. That is part of one of the things that a lot of officers have to go through before they can even become an officer. But there are those who slip through the cracks.
Well, I like to see their results, too, though.
Right, and I think given the realities of implicit bias and the difficulties of getting it, I mean, is it incumbent upon us to teach our boys to behave differently in public spaces? I mean, is that
I'm not even going to get on that.
That's going to have to be a discussion for next week.
Oh, man. I think it's definitely okay.
Well, this is the same narrative that we have had to explain to our children since being on these shores. So it wouldn't be any different of a narrative that we have not already shared. And so if that, well, I am completely against it because we are human beings.
Okay.
We are human beings. We do not have to cow face to anyone, to no one.
We getting locked up.
But that has nothing to do with our own humanity. Yeah. We will not dehumanize ourselves because we are in a dehumanizing system. I pray that there were not a Harriet Tubman did not dehumanize herself because she was a part of or in an institution that sought to dehumanize her.
Right.
You know what I mean?
I agree
So I'm
with that.
so thankful that we had those that did not succumb to this ideal that we had to accept.
It doesn't work anyway.
It doesn't work anyway.
But to
doesn't
me,
work
it's not
anyway.
accepting. Like, I have two sons, and having them wear their pants a certain way and speak a certain way and shake hands. And
I'm
look
sorry,
people
my
in the
friend.
eye.
I have a brother who
Right.
wears his pants up on his waist, if
Right.
not above.
Right.
He has been harassed,
Right.
taken out of his car, put on a hood
Right.
by some St. Louis police officers. So I don't care how well they speak, how
Right.
educated, because he is a graduating senior at Emory University.
Right.
I don't
So you don't
care.
make it decreases the
That
likelihood.
it decreases the likelihood.
It does not decrease the
No,
likelihood.
I don't
Jail?
think it decreased the
I think-
likelihood
It does,
either.
the
Did your
fact
brother
that
go to jail?
the fact that my baby brother had
Hold on,
to
did he go to
endure,
jail?
he didn't do anything wrong.
Did he go to jail though?
He did not do
Did he
anything
go to-
wrong.
go to
No,
jail?
there
That
is
means
no
he
question.
He has not entered the system.
Thank God. God is such a blessing.